Josh Frydenberg, good morning, welcome.
Nice to be with you, Barry.
So the policy has a pulse, but survival surely is far from guaranteed.
Well, last Friday's meeting was important, and in the words of the Independent Energy Security Board, was a big step forward. So the National Energy Guarantee, which will help lower families' power bills by $550 a year, is a step closer. We have to disassociate the crass short-term political calculations going on in Victoria from the long-term national interest. Victoria has been consulted every step of the way. They have been approving of the design and the process, but they get a few hundred emails in inner city seats from Green voters. Suddenly they're spooked and they're put in these...
But what they're asking for is that you get your own act together, demonstrate through your own party room that you've got the support, and then they'll have a think about it. That's fair enough, isn't it?
Well, as the Prime Minister's made clear, we've already had a number of extensive discussions on the National Energy Guarantee, and I'm confident that come Tuesday, my colleagues will again move forward to the next stage with the National Energy Guarantee. I welcome Prime Minister John Howard's comments the other day supporting the National Energy Guarantee. My colleagues have been briefed by the miners, the manufacturers, the farmers, the industry groups who say this is the only game in town to reduce people's power bills.
Right. How confident are you about the party? How would you describe the numbers in the party room? Are they overwhelmingly behind you on this? How many malcontents are there, to use Lily Ambrosio's term?
Look, there is strong support in the party room. Prime Minister and myself and other ministers continue to talk with our colleagues. My colleagues are focused on one thing, which is to reduce people's power bills, and rightly so. And we have turned the corner, Barry. Last week, the wholesale price of power was $68. The same time last year, it was $101. That's more than a 30% reduction. We saw reductions from the 1st of July this year in Queensland, South Australia and New South Wales. There's more to go, but the government's interventions in the gas market and the other activities that we're undertaking are making a difference, and we will follow through on the ACCC's recommendations as well as the National Energy Guarantee.
There's a lot of though threats on either side and exaggerated language. I mean, you talk about the potential for blackouts.
Well, that's real.
In Victoria's case?
Absolutely. Last September, the Australian Energy Market Operator said there was a 43% chance of load shedding in Victoria. That's a euphemism for blackouts. Victoria not only has the second highest prices in Australia, but it also, following the closure of Hazelwood, which took 25% of the supply out of the market, has gone from being an exporter of power at times to now being an importer of power. One of the key aspects of the National Energy Guarantee is the reliability mechanism. So if Daniel Andrews and Victoria Labor want to put Green votes in inner city seats ahead of the reliability of their system and lower prices, then that's a political price they'll have to pay.
Can you live with the political price of, say, Tony Abbott and Barnaby Joyce crossing the floor on this issue?
Well, look, again, I'm very confident that my colleagues understand the importance of the National Energy Guarantee as a way to move forward and provide investment certainty, but ultimately to lower people's power bills.
But they're not talking like people who are about to be persuaded. They're out. Now, what are the prospects of them crossing the floor?
Well, I'm not going to be a commentator. I'll leave that to you. I'm looking forward to a constructive discussion with my colleagues on Tuesday. They know how hard this is, and they know that Australia needs to break with the impasse that has dogged this policy in the past. As the political battle lines have been drawn over energy and climate policy in Australia in the last 15 years, it's been the consumers who have been the casualties. So we've got to get prices down. We've got a number of mechanisms to do that. We are having some success already, and we'll continue to have more.
Just so that we get the sequence right, there are two bills to be released this week, right? The framework, that's the one that involves the states, and then the separate bill is around emissions targets. That's the one for the party room and then ultimately the parliament, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Now, on the emissions targets, you've said in the package that we just ran that you're not negotiating at all around regulations versus legislation. That remains your position.
Well, again, Labor's position goes against their own experience and their own decisions in the past. Victoria legislated their own renewable energy target and said so because they wanted to create investment certainty.
Yeah, but you know better than anybody how difficult it is to get an energy policy through the parliament, and yet you're saying to Labor into the future, throw yourself at the mercy of the parliament like everybody else does.
Well, actually, the sector is saying we want investment certainty, and legislation is the way to determine that. Now, federal Labor, when they were last in government, legislated the renewable energy target in 2009 and 2010. State Labor legislated their renewable energy target. This is politicking and posturing, and what the sector wants is investment certainty, and that is the pathway to lower prices, so we won't be negotiating on that.
I want to ask you about the Great Barrier Reef Foundation. And I'll pick up on a key point that was asked of you on 2GB. You were asked many times to give an answer to this question. Whose idea was it to meet with the foundation and then to invite them to take this $500 million grant?
Well, Barry, this is not an idea that was developed overnight. It actually goes back to early last year when my department chaired an interdepartmental task force in looking at how we meet the challenges from the reef. That led to a $57 million injection in the reef at last MyEFO. Now, I then, as the minister responsible, took a submission through the cabinet process, through the budget process, to get more money to spend.
Is this before the meeting with John Schubert?
Yes, it is, absolutely. And in those submissions, we raised the possibility of putting the money into the foundation. Now, my department, and this is important.
So who raised the possibility of putting the money into the foundation?
Well, it went through the budget process.
Who raised the idea?
It was in my submission to the cabinet process.
So it was your idea?
It was my submission as the minister through the cabinet process. Now, I want to make something very clear. My department has unequivocally told me and through me to the government that a commitment, a large funding commitment to this foundation will meet the objectives of the government in protecting the reef. Yeah. That secondly represents value for money in meeting those objectives, and thirdly and importantly complies with the government's grant guidelines.
But what steps did you take, or did the Prime Minister take, to satisfy yourself that the foundation was the best organisation to accept this grant?
Well, the department has made it very clear that the foundation is the best organisation where we can leverage...
What steps were taken to satisfy yourself that's the case?
Well, my department made it very clear that this is the best... Barry...
What did they do? What did you do? What did the Prime Minister do to satisfy yourself there was nobody else out there that was better qualified than the foundation to take the money?
Well, this is the best foundation and the best organisation.
What did you do to satisfy yourself?
There was extensive due diligence that was done.
There were no tenders called.
There was well, firstly, if you want to talk about tenders, the Labor Party has provided billions of dollars without tender. It's not unusual to provide large grants. The ANAO...
It should be unusual, shouldn't it?
Well, OK. The ANAO did a report in 2012 which found that when the Labor Party was in office between 2007 and 2010, they looked at nearly 400 of their grants, and more than a third of those did not go to a competitive tender process. Now, let me make it very clear. The foundation was chosen because it is the best organisation to leverage off the private sector. In the words of Anthony Albanese, it's a reputable organisation. Tony Burke gave money to the foundation when he was in government. My department has made it very clear that the guidelines were complied with, that it represented value for money, and it was the best way to deal with the urgent need of putting money into the foundation.
How do you satisfy yourself that the foundation above anybody else was the best organisation to do with? Had you called tenders, don't you think you would have got a better sense of whether they were best suited to do this?
Well, this organisation has raised $65 million from the private sector. It's been a partner for both federal and state governments. And we know from their track record of working indeed with the federal government and with other bodies that they have delivered excellent results, that they have managed large technical projects with multi-stakeholders, and that they put science as their preeminent focus.
That demonstrates they're qualified to deal with the money. It doesn't demonstrate that there's nobody else out there better qualified.
Well, let me just put it to you. When the Labor Party provided billions of dollars to the coal generators, they put it all out in one hit, and they didn't run a tender process either. What we've got here is a proven organisation with the chair of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority on its board, with the former CEO of the Australian Institute of Marine Science on the board. Why this issue is being raised, Barry, obviously by the Labor Party, is because when they were in government, they did nothing to protect the reef and went on the endangered watch list.
You talk about the makeup of the board.
Yes.
A former board member, right, Michael Meyer, has talked about the increasing influence of big business and the fossil fuel industry on the foundation's activities. Now, that should set off alarm bells straight away. If a former board member is worried about the influence of the fossil fuel industry, and this is the group that's now controlling spending on the Great Barrier Reef.
Well, actually, that's wrong. Anna Marsden, the CEO, has made it very clear that it will be the scientists and it will be science-based decision-making, not the companies who donate to this foundation that determine the decision.
But when you hear that kind of assessment on it by a former board member, it does seem to suggest that what you might have done here is to give the money to this foundation that's dominated by big business and the fossil fuel industry to counter the environmentalists and their concerns.
Absolutely not. The reason why this organisation was chosen was because there's an urgent need to deal with the reef. There were successive bleaching events in 2016 and 2017. In 2017, you also had Cyclone Debbie. The advice to the government is that there is an urgent need to help restore the reef. This is the single largest reef conservation project and commitment in Australia's history. When we came to government and we inherited from Labor a reef that was on the endanger watch list, 5 dredge disposal projects planned for the reef, no long-term plan and insufficient funding. We've corrected all those things.
Just in terms of the funding then?
Yes.
It's a 6-year program.
Yes.
So the money is spent over 6 years and yet you give them almost $500 million up front. They can then invest that money, gain interest on it, while they're spending it over 6 years.
Well, the first point is there is an urgent need to spend the money on the reef. The second is there is
over 6 years.
There is economies of scale. Thirdly, they actually get maximum flexibility in meeting the objectives of the grant as well as leveraging off the private sector.
Sure, but why a lump sum?
Because it's not unusual for governments to do that, like I said.
But maybe it should be unusual.
Well, I don't know if you asked the questions of the Labor Party when they made billions of dollars to coal generators in one lump sum. Well, then invite them back. But the key point here is that the reef is an outstanding organisation. When the announcement was made, the Chief Scientist of Australia said this is a great day for science and for the reef. The head of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority.
I still don't get why it was paid in a lump sum and not in annual.
Well, the money is to be spent over 6 years, but by giving it all at once, they've got maximum leverage to enter into the contracts to start providing the money as need be to meet their objectives.
And if they gain $20 million or whatever in interest in the meantime, is that their money?
The money goes to all their money. It's a not-for-profit organisation. It's a philanthropic activity that's been in place for nearly 18 years. It was established for the very purpose that the World Heritage Committee asked for foundations be set up in countries to protect World Heritage sites. The Turnbull government, like previous coalition governments, has an outstanding commitment to the reef and to save it. It was Malcolm Fraser who first put it on the World Heritage list.
Okay,
it's Malcolm Turnbull who's now investing in the reef.
Just a final question. They've got a staff of 6. How many do you think they'll need to administer this amount of money?
Well, they've made it very clear they will be scaling up their operations, but they have a proven track record of managing major projects. We have delivered for the reef. Labor never did. This is a political exercise. All the guidelines were complied with. The objective of the government is to protect the reef, and this $500 million commitment to the reef is outstanding. It's been celebrated and should continue to be as such.
Thanks for your time this morning.
Good to be with you.